Today, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment you love without the hassle. DirecTV Stream brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, which means you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. And the best part? There's no annual contract. So stop waiting and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
Forensic Psychology is a podcast that provides an illuminating window into the workings of the criminal mind. Now, here's your host, Dr. Carlos.
Welcome back, everybody. Hey, before we get started, hopefully you like the new format we were having. We're doing a lot more interviews. We've been popping up those. I think we're going to pop up interviews Monday through Wednesday, so 3 days a week. We know not everybody can catch every interview. Sometimes we run out of time. And then Thursday and Friday, we'll do smaller segments, probably 5 or 10 minute segments on a particular forensic psychology topic. And then either Friday or Thursday, I'll make one legal case a week. So we'll talk about different legal cases, and that's also part of the world of forensic psychology. So today we're going to be looking at the case of Gary Ewing versus California. Before we get started, please make sure to hit those 5 stars on Apple if you really like our podcast. It really helps a lot, or any other platform you're on. So here we go. So Ewing versus California, Justice O'Connor announced the judgment of the court and delivered an opinion, and we'll talk more about that. The case was deciding whether the Eighth Amendment prohibits the state of California from sentencing a repeat felon to a prison term of 25 years to life under the California state law, 3 strikes, you're out. California's 3 strikes law reflects a shift in the state's sentencing policies towards incapacitating and deterring offenders, this is years ago, who threaten the public safety. By the way, I've talked about this before. We see the shift between harsh punishment and rehabilitation. We've seen it for decades. It flips about every 25 to 30 years. You'll have a movement towards harsh punishment, then you have a movement towards rehabilitation. In the 60s and 70s, I think it was rehabilitation. In the 80s and 90s, it became harsh punishment, and now we're back to rehabilitation. But I think due to the increase in crime, I mean, we see homicide rates went up 30% for violent crime, the highest increase in history, at least recorded history. I guess you're going to get the funny feeling you're going to be shifting back to a harsher punishment. But anyway, back to this case. The 3 strikes law varies from state to state. The goal is to incapacitate and deter, which are actually 2 criminological theories, repeat offenders who threaten public safety. The law was designed to ensure longer prison sentences and greater punishment for those who commit a felony. The deterrence is obviously, if they see they're going to go to life for committing a crime or felony, they may not do it. And of course, the incapacitating part is they're not around society anymore because they're in jail for years to come. Now, to ensure longer prison sentences and greater punishment for those who commit a felony and have been previously convicted of serious and or violent felony offenses. The 3 strikes laws I mentioned varies from state to state. They share a common goal of protecting the public safety by providing lengthy prison terms for habitual felons. That's the key word. Because you're going to see it framed differently a lot of times in the media. They'll pick something like they try to do with this one the defense attorney did. I get it. It's the defense attorney. And you'll see what they did. They try to describe it as he just stole 3 items and he got sentenced to life for 25 years. But we'll find out that's really the case or not and what the judges decided. Under California law, which is where this case is, the defendant has 1 prior serious or violent felony conviction. He must be sentenced to twice the term otherwise provided as punishment for the current felony conviction. If the defendant has 2 or more serious or violent felony convictions, he must receive an indeterminate term of life imprisonment. Defendants sentenced to life under the 3 strikes law become eligible for parole on a date calculated by a reference to a minimum term, which is a greater of 3 times the term otherwise provided for the current conviction, or 25 years. So this is what they call mandatory sentencing, a lot of these things, and similar to this. So the judge really doesn't have a whole lot of wiggle room here in the sentencing because they saw too much disparity between judges in the judicial system, so they created some of these mandatory sentencing, it was really much more strict before, and then after the last 15 years, it's loosened up where the judges have more wiggle room. Back to this. So what did Gary Ewing really do? Well, on parole from a 9-year prison term, Gary Ewing walked into a pro shop of El Segundo Golf Course in LA County in 2000. He walked out with 3 golf clubs. But here's the kicker. Each golf club cost $400. He concealed them in his pants leg. That's right. The police apprehended Ewing in the parking lot. Ewing was no stranger to the criminal justice system. Between 84 and 93, Ewing pled guilty or was convicted of theft on 3 occasions, as well as battery, burglary, possession of drug paraphernalia, and unlawful possession of a firearm. In October and November of 1993, Ewing committed 3 burglaries and 1 robbery in Long Beach over a 5-week period of time. In December of 1993, this is in 3 months, Ewing was arrested on the premises of the apartment complex for trespassing and lying to a police officer. Jury convicted Ewing of first-degree robbery and 3 counts of residential burglary and sentenced him to 9 years and 8 months in prison. Ewing was paroled in 1999. Just 10 months later, at least the crime that he was caught for doing, he stole the golf clubs at issue in this case. He was charged with and ultimately convicted of 1 count of felony grand theft of personal property in excess of $400. Ewing was sentenced under the 3 strikes law to 25 years to life. So he was charged with and ultimately convicted of 1 count of felony grand theft of personal property that exceeded $400. That was a California law. Now it's $900 something. He still would have got it anyway because it was $1,200 worth. So what's the rule of law? It's sentencing a repeat felon to 25 years imprisonment under a 3 strikes law does not violate the 8th Amendment prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. That's what his defense attorney was. That's what his defense was, that they were violating the 8th Amendment by sentencing him to 25 years imprisonment. They violated the 8th Amendment by cruel and unusual punishment. So let's see what happened. So if we look further, some crimes may be deemed felonies or misdemeanors at the discretion of the prosecutor of the court. Courts may also avoid the 3 strikes rule by vacating allegations of earlier serious or violent felonies, which we've seen actually in some counties. Ewing was charged with felony grand theft, and the prosecutor invoked the 3 strikes law. The trial court did not exercise its discretion to reduce the charge or vacate earlier allegations. Ewing was convicted and sentenced again to 25 years. The Supreme Court granted certiorari to consider whether or not it was true that they violated the 8th Amendment. So again, the issue at hand is, does sentencing a repeat felon to 25 years imprisonment under a state's 3 strikes law violate the 8th Amendment? So what was the holding or the decision? Justice O'Connor said, no. The Constitution does not prohibit a 25-year sentence for serious habitual offenders. The principle of proportionality that forms part of the 8th Amendment was limited by Harmelin and Michigan in 1991 for cases not involving the death penalty. The state interest in protecting public safety from habitual offenders spawned 3 strikes laws across the country. California's law reflects the policy choice of the legislature to remove repeat, violent, or serious offenders from society. Almost 70% of offenders released from prison will commit another serious crime within 3 years. Recidivism laws further the goals of incapacitation and deterrence. That's what they're terming this as, is a recidivism law. California did see a 25% drop in the recidivism rate following the passage of the law. Of course, incapacitation is what happened. California's legislature bears the responsibility for assessing the law's prudence, and this court is satisfied that the law had a reasonable basis for believing the law promotes its goals. In this case, there's no great disproportion between the seriousness of the offense and the sentence. Ewing was convicted of stealing items worth $1,200 after already 4 serious or violent felonies. The sentence is warranted by California's interest in protecting the public from repeat offenders like Ewing through incapacitation and deterrence. Now, there was, of course, dissent, and one of the dissents was Justice Stevens. He says the 8th Amendment bars excessive punishment, and judges have the authority to determine what punishment is permissible under the amendment. Historically, judges have been given broad discretion in sentences, and those judges assess the proportionality of a sentence in light of all the goals. The principle of proportionality, this is before the mandatory sentence, this is 2003. The principle of proportionality underlying the 8th Amendment considers each of these penological goals of punishment. So they really did, according to Stevens really believed there was a violation, but the 5-4 and the Supreme Court said it wasn't. So it held, and Ewing was sent to 25 years. So there you go. 3 strikes law, Ewing versus California.
Everybody needs just the right amount of fuel to get going in the morning. For some, a nice McDonald's egg and cheese bagel is just enough to do it. Others might prefer a McDonald's bacon, egg, and cheese bagel. Or perhaps a sausage, egg, and cheese bagel. And there are those where nothing will do but a hearty McDonald's steak, egg, and cheese bagel. 4 different breakfast bagels to get you going. Tomorrow morning, give your engine a head start at participating McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.